Rohan Dredge, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. It's wonderful to see you again. How have you been?
I'm doing really well, mate. And it's absolutely wonderful to have this conversation with you, having known you for so many years and been able to cheer you on as your career's developed and as you've developed. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
It's wonderful to connect. And for those people that don't know, you have had more of an impact on my life and my leadership journey than I think it's hard to put into words. So I'm incredibly grateful. And it's been such a thrill to see this sort of new chapter in your life and all the amazing things that you're doing. But it really is a pleasure to get to sit down virtually and have a chat to you. And quite possibly the most important question, Ro, what's your coffee order when I can finally swing up and buy you a coffee?
Yeah, well, that's about 5 years ago. I switched out to no milk, and now I'm a straight up double espresso. And most times I get a little bit of hot water in the top just to break things up and keep it going a little bit longer. But can't keep me away from the double espresso. I love it.
Fantastic. And is there a book, Rowan, that has caused you to stop and reconsider a few things in your life? Anything that you're reading at the moment?
Yeah, that was a wonderful question. There are times and moments in your life and leadership and your career and your personal development that you are arrested by certain things. I don't mean arrested as in I've done something wrong. I mean, you stopped in your tracks. And I read when I was about 25, 26 years old, I read a book called Overcoming the Dark Side of Leadership. Right. And yeah, I know we're really starting off with an inspirational way of thinking. The reason why it helped me so much was that, and I'm a highlighter and an underliner of books, and there was one chapter that I may as well have spray painted. It was, I was archetypally this particular kind of leader, and it was a real eye-opener for me, because I think most of us in leadership and life, we build a career based on the things that we're really, really good at, but we can undo it by our shadow side or our dark side. And it was that mirror that made a real difference to me. It was a fascinating book. And to this day, it still challenges me. Matt, to this day, some of those characteristics still arrive in my leadership and in people experiencing me. So, yeah, it's a challenge.
Wow. And Rogue, seeing as we started off getting quite personal, we've got deep really quickly, which is wonderful. And what are some of those things in your leadership that you're keeping in check? I know I can get overly obsessed sometimes with things, probably to the detriment of work-life balance, but can you relate to that? Or what are some of the things that you're kind of keeping in check?
Yeah, great question. Well, what that book basically unpacked was that I'm a driven leader. So that's essentially the summary of it. And I drive myself, I drive others, and I can move along the continuum to the point where I really stop caring about how people are feeling, how they're going, and what they're doing. And I stay singularly focused on the objective, and I forget about the cost. And I could still do that today. I've still got the capability. I've still got the seeds of the dark side or the shadow side in me to do it. But one of the beautiful things as you get older, we're talking, that's nearly 30 years ago, right? So, one of the things as you get older and your career develops and you move along, you do get the opportunity to reflect on your successes and reflect on your failures and make some changes. And I like to think that I'm still very determined. I'm still pretty committed. I'm still very committed to where we're going, but I want to spend a lot more time taking people with me. Yeah. And I've had successes along the way. I've had challenges along the way with all of that. But the critical piece was mirror got held up, and I saw if I was going to really unravel something or someone or an organization, I would do it by being that driven leader. Whilst it doesn't ever go away, you just get better at self-leadership and self-management and hopefully maturity and self-awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, Ro, that's so important. And I love the question. I think it's from the 5 voices that you're saying that what do you think it's like to be on the other side of you? And it's a question that we had a bit of a rough night with our kids last night. They're still at that age where they wake up multiple times and want to hug I'm also very aware that that's not going to last forever. So for me, it's that tension of both appreciating these moments we have, but also craving sleep. And I woke up this morning thinking, geez, it wasn't very nice to be on the other side of me last night. And it's a question that I ask my wonderful wife quite often. And it's interesting, isn't it? When you begin to hold that lens up to yourself and say, okay, what is it like being on the other side of me? And how does that quote, why was that quote so important to you? And how as leaders can we begin to be a little bit more self-reflective?
What I've determined out of that quote or out of that thought is that leadership starts with self-leadership, and self-leadership starts with self-awareness.
Yeah.
And the best question I've discovered so far to unpack the idea of self-awareness is, what's it like to be on the other side of me?
Yeah.
And I discovered that question in 2019, listening to a podcast, and I followed the rabbit hole down to an organization called Giant Worldwide and found they've got this leadership assessment. And I'll give you the link to provide our listeners that link as well. I did the assessment, I signed on to the training, and several years later, I'm one of APAC's leading facilitators in what's called the 5 Voices of Leadership. But the fundamental question, Matt, is what's it like to be on the other side of me? And I found that encouraging. I found it inspiring. I found it confronting, all at the same time. But the reason why I love it the most is because that question starts with me taking responsibility as a leader. It doesn't start with me blaming my staff, blaming my students, blaming my colleagues, blaming the organization. It starts with me going, hang on a minute. If I'm going to be the kind of leader I'd like to follow, what does self-leadership look like? And if I want to do well at self-leadership, what does self-awareness look like? And if I want to start the journey towards self-awareness, what's it like to be on the other side of me? So I talked earlier about my shadow side. The flip side of the shadow side is I can figure things out in organizations and group dynamics and teams and leaders really, really quickly. What's become important is a strategy and a process to help people uncover that for themselves, get involved in the training and change journey, and participate in growth along the way. And so that's been a real game changer, that question, because if something's not going right, if it's not going the way I'd like it, or a team's not performing, the right question is, well, what's it like to be on the other side of me as a leader? What's it like to be on the other side of us as a team? What's it like to be on the other side of us as a cohort of colleagues, or as a senior leadership group in the educational space? What's it like to be on the other side of us? And it demands responsibility. It invites humility, and it gives us the opportunity to do things differently, which I love. I find that inspiring.
And it's really liberating, isn't it, to know that you can, like, responsibility actually, like you're saying, starts with you. And it's very easy to blame the system. It's very easy to blame all these other things. But I think it's what Jocko Willink talks about extreme ownership, about like taking responsibility for where you're at. And Ro, I know you just yesterday celebrated a birthday, so happy birthday.
At the time of recording, that is right. Yeah, great day too. I love that.
Great day. And so, Ro, I won't reveal what wonderful milestone that is. You look so much younger than your chronological age, but what's important to you in this decade of your life?
Yeah.
And how has that shifted from previous decades?
Well, look, there's a couple of things. Number one, I don't really have any issues with how old I am. I think I gave up calendars a long time ago. I prefer the idea of seasons and periods of time. So to put our listeners out of their misery, I was 54 years old yesterday. So I'm a 1970 model. The advantage I've got is my wife and I delayed having children, so our kids are only 14 and 12. And so in a way, I'm dragged back a decade. So all our friends are in their early 40s and with kids of a similar age. And so, amazing. The hardest thing I've got to do is keep up. So that's the challenge there. So I've probably got 3 things going on in the decade. Certainly at a fundamental level, I'm thinking about like the best years of my life are still ahead of me. I've had a long career. I've had a career that, I'm largely proud of. and I'm looking forward to developing an increased ability to serve people and influence people and shape the future. So there is a legacy piece going on. As I said, been married 27 years. My kids are 14 and 12. I've got plenty to do. Lots of bike riding, lots of surfing, lots of planning holidays, and that's all ahead of us as a family. So, certainly there's still a memory making period of time going on. And I'm a CEO of a business. I'm the CEO of an organization called Pragmatic Thinking. We're a behavior and motivation strategy company. I'm a part owner in that business. And we are obviously post-COVID. Businesses like ours, consulting businesses, had to change and adapt. And so I'm part of a very, very formidable team. And we're really having a red hot go at the market with leadership training, team development, and looking at how really solid contemporary behavioral science helps people lead more effectively and do work well. We spend a third of our lives at work, Matt. If you add up working and sleeping, we spend a third of our lives at work. And your listeners are largely in the education space. I personally think they're undervalued. I personally think that some of our misnomers and misconceptions about educators, I started my career as an educator and as a teacher, and loved it. And my wife's an educator, and I think they're undervalued. And I think we miss the opportunity to appreciate the kind of impact that they have on people. So I took the question in a slightly different direction there, but there's a lot going on in my decade right now, and I've got to stay fit, stay healthy, stay alert, and enjoy all of the responsibilities I've got.
I love it, Ro. And before we move on to have a conversation about leadership, and I know that you're an expert and a real leading voice in that space, I did just want to ask you a little bit about family, because I remember when I found out, it took us a little while to have kids, and I remember phoning you and saying, oh my goodness, I'm about to become a dad. I remember sitting in a car park in Woolies. There were all sorts of emotions. And you were the first person that I thought of calling, because I've just seen how well you and your lovely wife do family. So what does family mean to you? And how has being a dad changed you? Because it has fundamentally changed me, I think, for the better.
My observations are that you're doing very well at it, mate. So the bits that people don't see were the off camera parts of the conversation before we started. So even with all your concerns or fears or whatever, which I think are perfectly natural, you seem to be doing a great job.
Thank you.
I think becoming a father is, along with being a partner, in my case, a husband to Megan, they're two of the most fundamental responsibilities in the world, I think. And they're actually also, scarily enough, two of the relationships that we can take for granted most easily. So I don't see it as a battle or anything like that. It's simply allocation of priorities, allocation of time, allocation of energy. And what I've learned most about being a dad is that I've got disproportionate responsibility and disproportionate power in the privilege of bringing up our kids. And we are by no means perfect. In fact, I will tell you, there are evenings where Megan, my wife, and I, we sit together and we hear other people's stories and we go, we feel more normal. We're going through all the things that every other parent of teenagers and preteens goes through. We're managing Fortnite. We're dealing with, exercise and sport and all the things that go with it.
Yeah.
But we've always believed that we're raising adults who happen to be kids right now. So that's been one of the most powerful thoughts that shaped us. We're always raising adults and they happen to be kids right now. And so being able to think and parent and talk to the kids through the lens of principles was a really powerful one. So for example, we talk about, we want our children to be children of character. Okay, well, what does that mean? And so we talk about telling the truth. So we have a mantra in our family and we say truth is celebrated, even when it's hard. So truth is celebrated, even when it's hard. And so because there'll be things that are going on in their lives, there'll be things that they'll be ashamed to talk about, afraid to talk about. And I simply say to them, hey, in our family, truth is celebrated, and even when it's hard. We also say, forgiveness is final. We won't remember and we plan to forget. And so we say forgiveness is final. So when I say I forgive you, it's final. I won't get historical when we argue. It's something that we just move on from. So we've tried to do that as best as we can. The other thing, Matt, is it's the crazy time. So, you mentioned my birthday yesterday. My 12-year-old son, try as I might, I said, you will support the New South Wales Blues in the state of origin. That is a directive from me as your father.
Yes.
And he just looked at me and he said, but Dad, you've lived in Sydney. I've never lived there. Like, he cornered me and I said, all right, mate, you choose. So he's chosen to go for Queensland.
This is final row. You're going to have to.
We don't forget. Yes. No, sorry, we don't remember. Whoops. Anyway, I opened my presents yesterday and my 12-year-old has bought me a Queensland Maroons cup. And he is dancing and singing and yelling and carrying on and waving this thing in front of my face. And I think, you know what? That is priceless. That is family's made up of thousands and thousands and thousands of small moments that have big impacts. And I think, as a dad, my job is to make sure that it's not exclusively my responsibility, but to commit to Megan in a way that, looks after, blesses the kids, and also see my role as being a bit of a memory maker. Where can we go? What can we do? What can we experience that would be good for us as a family moving forward? Because, growing up in a family of 5, a very loving family, we were very active kids, played a lot of sport, but I don't remember the washing up, the meal preparation, the washing, the ironing. I don't really have a recollection of how hard my parents worked, but I really remember the moments and the memories and the holidays and the sailing and various things that we did. So you try and do that as best as you can, and certainly by no means perfect, but I do love it.
I love that, Ro, and I think one of a very early memory for me of how you and Megan do family was, and I could have this wrong, I believe it was your anniversary many years ago. Megan had gone away and you decided to use, I think you might have said to her, your anniversary present is you'd repainted the apartment or something. Yeah. Is that right? And
That's
I remember
right.
thinking, and I think it was you probably shared that story with me as we were having a Gloria Jean somewhere in Sutherland. And I remember thinking, geez, I want to be that husband. What a great present to be able to give your wife, to be able to renovate their apartment. For some reason, that always stuck with me. So thank you for your example, Ro. And it's, really awesome to hear your heart behind that.
Look, and the interesting thing is I'm the most unpractical man on earth. So what I actually did was mobilize half a dozen friends, buy pizza, and basically, partied together and had pizza and painted walls, and I did a whole bunch of different things. But yep. That was mainly organizational than practical, but we got it done.
Yeah. And I think I remember you saying that your renovations in your house get done by either Visa or MasterCard. And that is a mantra that I currently uphold, that principle. So thank you for that example, because there's no point me trying to fix it. It's just not going to work.
It's just not going to work, and it's not going to happen. I am that guy. It is not a good use of my time or attention. Fortunately, my father-in-law is a builder, so I get enormous amounts of things done, and he seems to enjoy it. So carry on, Dad.
So, Ro, let's pivot slightly and let's have a chat about leadership. I mean, you are a global expert in leadership. I mean, you're incredibly experienced. I know you wouldn't say that about yourself, but the scope and the experience that you have in leadership is really second to none, in my opinion. And how do you define leadership? And also, what are some of the attributes of great leaders?
Yeah. Again, things change over time, I think, with your career. And, I'm tapping on 30 years in a career of teaching, learning, leading voluntary groups, leading in community development spaces, corporate spaces. And really, there's probably 3 significant pillars when it comes down to it. And at its core, the most fundamental is the one we see the least, which is character. It's who am I when no one's looking? Who am I when I can't get anything out of it? Who am I when you can't give anything to me? How do I treat people I don't know and don't really have an impact on my world? the late 90s, Megan and I actually had someone say to us, "Don't you know who I am?" And in the context of them wanting something because they considered themselves special. And we felt like in that moment we were liberated from being entitled, liberated from having our name somewhere. And I just couldn't care less. I don't worry about that stuff. Am I a man of impeccable character? Oh, don't think so, but I'm working on it imperfectly in that sense. And at the same time, I really believe that the leaders I'm most inspired by are the ones that keep showing up and keep growing and developing in the face of adversity and realize what they are great at, and they bring that to the world with confidence and not deprecating. We actually need in Australia and Australasia, we actually need, I believe, a revolution of our superpowers. We need to switch people on to what they're great at and encourage them to bring it. And I think, so leadership lives in those tensions. Leadership lives in the tension of its character, who am I when no one's looking? It's forged in the challenges and the perseverance and the resilience, but it's also celebrated in people's superpowers and people's abilities to bring things that are, in many cases world-class, but we've got to be able to liberate people to do that and enjoy that and bring that.
Yeah. That's so important, Ro. And you strike me as, not you strike me, I know that you will probably edit that bit out, sorry. I know that you're someone who is constantly learning and constantly, sorry, we might have to rephrase that question, sorry, Ro. So, Ro, what are some of the things that you do practically to grow and develop your leadership? Because you seem like someone that is always learning, always listening, always positioning yourself in a place of learning. So talk me through that process.
And those things have only changed over time, Matt, because of the platforms that we can access information through. Again, a generation ago, you'll be the sum total of the person in 5 years, the people you hang around, the books that you read, and the tapes that you listen to. Like, welcome to the 90s. And now it's exactly the same principle, right? It's, what do I need to learn, know, understand, be challenged by, do differently? Where do I go to find that? Where do I go to get the inspiration? Where do I go to get challenged by what I currently think? Challenged by what might be changing over time. So podcasts, Blinkist is huge for me because it's in 15 minutes, I can effectively cover off the core parts of a book. Podcasts, and then you end up with some of your favorites. So I love listening to Adam Grant. Love listening to the Diary of a CEO. Really enjoy Professor Scott Galloway. A friend of mine in the faith-based world is a guy called Carey Nieuwhof. He's runs a fabulous podcast. And so you just cycle around those, the imperfects, various different conversations. They're just, and that's been the beauty of the platforms. We have got access to some of the most brilliant people in the world. TED Talks, YouTube. Now, what I find is it's easy not to, so I can get out of the habit, number one. Number two, I've got to remind myself, I can actually listen to a Blinkist on the way to the office and on the way home. That's 10 a week.
Wow.
Right? And if I give myself holidays, that's 400 a year. And when you're listening to things, your subconscious remembers them.
That's right.
The second layer, I would say, is if I've got to really dial up skill development, I would read a book and I would grab a mentor. It's almost like that idea of coaching for skill development, and go, how do I unlearn what I already believe and already do, and how do I relearn what might be more effective? And so some of those things, and that becomes a bigger commitment in terms of energy and in terms of the discipline required to get there. But again, find your lane, find the people, ask for recommendations, because there's hundreds of platforms and readers and thinkers that I don't know about yet that I need people to tell me about.
So, Ro, before we move into some of those tensions that leaders manage, I was just wondering if there's an area in your life that you are currently trying to become more competent in? Is there a skill? Is there something that you think, geez, I really need to get better at this?
Yeah, it's for me, it's writing. I feel like I've got a book in me, but I keep sabotaging it. And yeah, then you go back to the dark side. This is, I'm quite spectacularly imperfect, right? It, there's no two ways about it. I'm good at a bunch of things and terrible at a lot. And but one of the things I've found difficult post COVID is I found writing difficult, and I want to recapture that. So that's something that I'm beginning to work on with a lot more discipline and a lot more focus. And again, there's tools available to help us, prompting ideas and AI and various other platforms that can actually help me with ideas. It helps me with my leadership development, my facilitation, metaphors, ideas, possibilities, ways of approaching things. I find it super useful. I love the idea that there's the word chat in Chat GPT, because I'm a talker, not a typer. So put in all sorts of random questions with AI and find it very helpful. But yeah, writing for me, watch this space. I've got to recapture that. It's not that I don't love it. I do. It's the discipline. I feel like I've got lots to do, short periods of time and bursts of energy. And writing requires a little bit more than that from me, a bit like a marathon for me rather than anything else.
I love that, Ro. And my wife, who you know well, she's a writer and also currently doing her PhD. And I have seen the discipline and emotion that goes into a well-crafted paragraph. And a couple of months ago, I got asked to begin to think about writing a book. And it's terrifying to be able to put something down on paper, to do it well. And I think being quite similar in the sense of we both read a lot, so we're both exposed to great writing. It's kind of terrifying because I think, my goodness, I couldn't possibly live up to some of these books that I'm reading. But I do think it is a discipline and really hard. And Ro, I can't wait for that book to be birthed. I think it will be amazing because you have so much to say in that space. So watch this space, eh?
Well, back at you with the book. Well done. That's exciting to hear.
Yeah, it is. It's terrifying, but I think I'm the king of the slow burn, and so I will. We're currently training for marathon. Thanks for bringing it up. How do you know someone's training for a marathon? They will tell you. But it is about those sort of daily disciplines of getting out, putting your shoes on, writing 500 words. And it's amazing, those incremental changes over time, the impact that they can have.
Absolutely.
So I can't wait to hear more about it, Ro. We talked a little bit before about the leadership or the tensions that leadership leaders manage. I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind unpacking a couple of them. So the first one I would love to get your thoughts on is the tension of awareness and authority. Why is that so important, and why do leaders have to manage that?
Well, I think what I appreciated off mic was our conversation about your listeners and education and educational leaders, and thinking about modern education, thinking about the change in the kind of person that's teaching in the classroom and beginning to lead, and even more broadly in, broader education itself. And I think these things are true in all contexts. That's the first thing I'll say. The other thing, Matt, I reckon that's useful around this is leadership isn't one thing or another. It's not binary. It's far more of a continuum. Yeah. And the reason why I talk about this idea of awareness and authority is, do I lead with this sense of self-awareness and almost deference to other people, or do I lead with this sense of I'm large and in charge? Okay. Yeah. And if you think about it across the course of a continuum, then firstly, you will turn up in a natural state. You'll either turn up as a supportive, compliant, sort of a I'm for you kind of person, or you'll turn up going, this is what's got to be done. Let's act like a team and do it my way.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
When I say it's a tension, what I mean is, firstly, you have a natural style. What is it? Right? So I'm naturally directive. So what I've got to do is I've got to dial up that awareness piece and come back and go, hey, what's going on for everybody? So I've learned to say, let's ask how we're doing before we ask what we're doing. So it's really important from that perspective. And it's really important to be thinking about the idea of what's it like to be led by me. When I walk into a room, what happens? Do I light up a room by walking into it, or do I light up a room by walking out of it? Which one is it?
It's going to be one of them.
And it will be. How do I learn the skills of the area I'm least effective at.
Right.
So
Yeah.
for me, because I'm much more naturally orientated towards this is the problem, this is what we've got to do, why haven't we started already? I have got to learn self-awareness, discipline, question asking, assuming the best. And again, you just learn it over time. But it's a tension because we need both. We need people to give us direction. We need leaders to make decisions. We need clarity of expectation. And we also want those people to be aware of how they show up, to be aware of what happens when they're in the room, to be aware of other people's contributions, feelings, and ways of working. And it's that, again, it's a pendulum, it's a continuum, it's a tension that never goes away, but it's all about dialing up that third eye, that camera that looks down in a sporting field that says, okay, what's required of me right now as a leader? How do I show up? What do I do?
Yeah, and that's so important, Rowan. And another one of the tensions that you talk about is discussions and decisions. And I was having this conversation with my wonderful wife a little while ago, and she said people often leave a meeting with you because we work together in a volunteer capacity as well. And she said people often leave meetings with you feeling excited and passionate, but they don't. I'll ask you that again, Ro. I think that was just a siren. So another one of the great tensions that you mentioned, Ro, is the tension between discussion and decisions. And I was having a conversation with my wife recently, and she said, people leave meetings with you feeling really inspired and really excited about what they're doing, but they don't know what the next step is. And I thought, okay, what I probably need to do realign that tension, because it's all nice to feel really good about ourselves, but if there's no actionable points or no clear expectation, then it kind of gets lost, doesn't it? But what are your thoughts on that? Because we've got to do both of those, don't we?
Absolutely. And, I really appreciate the fact that you reflect on that because, my experience of you of that is true. I think you're one of the most encouraging people I know from afar over a number of years. And I just think that's a wonderful thing. The idea behind this one, Matt, is we can talk or we can act, but we can get stuck in one or the other, right? If we're going to get stuck on the hamster wheel of talking about things, but not actually translating that into action with some intention in a particular direction, we're not making the most of the conversation. And so what I'm talking about there is to ask yourself, do I and does everybody else know exactly what's expected now that we've had this conversation?
Love that.
Do I and does everybody else know exactly what's expected now that we've had this conversation? Now, it's different. If we're going to get together and ideate, if we're going to get together and just come up with ideas, then maybe that's the objective. But it's really important to say, what's the purpose of this conversation and what is it that we'll be expected to do at the end of it? And so if you and I were chatting over a coffee and you said, what should I do differently, Rowan? I would simply say two things. Number one, before the meeting finishes, then you need to start your sentence with, let's do this. Let's do this. Andrew, I'll get you to focus on that. Alison, I'll get you to focus on that. Andrea, I'll get you to focus on that. Is everybody clear on what we need to do? Are there any questions?
Love that.
Let's do this. Is everybody clear? Are there any questions?
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And it's the quote, I believe it's by Brene Brown, that talks about clear is kind.
Clear is kind.
It's actually, and I've learned this. I feel like I've been through my awkward leadership phase. I'm continuing to go through that in a number of different facets, but it's really unfair to hold somebody to something that you haven't been clear about. And I've done that multiple times. And then you have all these expectations that you think are right in your head, but the other person is like, I don't actually have an actionable item here. I don't know what's expected. Yeah. So I think you're exactly right. Just being clear and making sure that we are people that are kind of holding that tension. I think it's so important.
Just before we go to the next one, PT, we talk about one of our programs dealing with the tough stuff. We talk about this idea of antecedents. And what we mean by that is an antecedent is what comes before. And I think one of the most powerful skills for a leader to learn, particularly when they're frustrated or they feel like things aren't being done or we're not sure if expectations are clear, is to actually unpack the antecedent. And what we mean by that is we're saying, hey, tell me what you think the priority is here, or tell me what you think we should be focusing on, or tell me what you heard from that meeting. Tell me what you think is the most important action for the next 4 weeks.
Love it.
All right. Or what are you thinking about when you're coming into the meeting? If you can uncover what's going on for a person before they act, you're uncovering the antecedent. And when you know the antecedent, you know their intention and their motive, but you also know whether they've got enough information or not. And it's very, very powerful. And I've found that to be a really, really unique tool to go, okay, they don't have enough information. I wasn't clear enough. They actually don't feel like they've got the resources. They don't feel like they can do the job. I basically made it multiple choice and they chose the wrong choice. As soon as you have those antecedent conversations, you're like, okay. And I will say, it's a really good parenting tool too, when your kids are like, you're the worst dad in the world. Okay, well, what is it that what is it that you've been thinking about that's made you upset about that? That's an antecedent question. Well, they said this and I was going to do that and you never. And I go, okay, so you feel like you're going to miss out on something. Yes. Okay. Well, now I'm understanding the antecedent and it's very helpful.
And also, Ro, it's great marriage advice. I can't tell you the amount of times my lovely wife and I are sitting on the couch and I think I've said something, or more, she thinks she said something to me, but I've interpreted it as something completely different. And I know the other day I came home and being at home with kids is the hardest job in the world. I'm on school holidays and I have so much more of an appreciation now for people that stay home with kids. And it was feeling my lovely wife she'd left a big pile of plates in the kitchen. It sounds so petty now when I'm talking about it. And I walked in and I thought, I feel so underappreciated. I feel like she doesn't understand all of these. And I created this narrative in my head and I was like, hang on a second. What I need to do is I need to stop and I need to think and I need to go, okay, let's not create a narrative here. And let's just go, okay, I'm not misinterpreting what's going on. And I think it was a real reminder. It's such a simple reminder that quite often we hear what we want to hear and we interpret things how we want to interpret them. And I love that tension when we talk about making sure that we're really clear and being kind and just slowing down. I always say, don't make any life-changing decisions on a Friday because you're usually tired and cranky at the kids. So a little bit of self-awareness there, Ro.
Absolutely. I closing this out, if in doubt, ask.
Yeah, love that.
Hey, help me understand. Fill me in. I'm curious to hear. There's a number of different ways to ask a non-judgmental, open-ended question that gets you the information you want. Or, hey, I noticed you're focusing on this. Tell me a bit more about, what's behind that. It's just one of the jobs of a leader is to be exceptionally curious and unpack people's motivations and people's thought processes, because they're the things that drive our behavior.
And Ro, there are a couple of other tensions, and there's just one that I would love to touch on because I think it's most pertinent to our teacher audience. And one of the other tensions is accountability and expectation. Tell and ask. But the one I'd love to get your perspective on is conflict and confrontation, because I know leaders, especially school leaders, we have to have those difficult conversations at times. And I'm not naturally someone that enjoys those. I don't know if anybody is, but talk to me about that tension between conflict and confrontation and how can we do a better job of that?
Yeah. Look, there is no doubt that feedback around performance and feedback around the contribution that people are making is one of the most important things for high-performing teams. It's one of the most important things for high-performing leaders, and it's one of the most misunderstood topics in terms of the way teams work and the way we handle culture, communication, conflict, and all those things. At its most base level, we address issues of conflict, tensions, and disagreements directly related to the way we were brought up. It's as simple as that. That's where we learn our fundamental patterns, our fundamental schemas for conflict resolution and for confrontation conversations. And typically fight, flight, freeze and fawn are the other ways that we respond. So I'll argue with you till I win. I'll give you the silent treatment, or I'll run away and act as if it doesn't happen. I'll give you the silent treatment, or I'll act like a victim. And none of those contribute to high performing teams, and none of those help leaders navigate their way through this well. The second thing I'll say is unaddressed conflict will erode team culture and performance really fast.
Yeah.
And if you're the leaders that are listening to us, unaddressed conflict will erode your leadership authority really fast. Now, what I mean by that is if other people are seeing you fail to hold other people to account, they will lose respect for you.
It's confronting.
It's very confronting because you are permitting poor behavior. Everybody knows it, and you won't do something about it. So the third thing is there's good news. There is a way that you can have performance and feedback related conversations that de-escalate conflict and depersonalize the conversation. And the two critical things in that are, number one, introduce a shared visual medium. So instead of staring at the person, you introduce a report, a book, a handbook, a piece of paper, and you both look at that, and that becomes the focus of the conversation. And the second thing is you actually reduce the amount of eye contact you make. When you reduce the amount of eye contact, you make it less personal. And when you're focusing on the third or the shared visual medium, you're talking about that as an issue. When you're looking at a person in their eyes, you're making it personal. And we've been taught that you always look in somebody's eyes when you're talking to them. But when we're having feedback and performance conversations, we actually look at a shared visual medium and we make that the issue. Could be a whiteboard, could be a shared screen on Zoom, could be any of those things. But the reason why it's a tension is because in the absence of good training, and we have a whole program called Dealing with the Tough Stuff, and it helps people do that really well. But in the absence of good training, we just default to whatever it is that we knew to do. So for me, I was always, okay, you're the dominant style leader. You use that dominance to get what you want done. Doesn't work. People just stop following after a while, and they don't appreciate it or enjoy it. So you've got to learn to have those tough conversations. So it's really important. It's really difficult, and I applaud the people who are trying to do it well. I'll add one last thing, Matt. I think great cultures aren't just full of leaders who know how to have the conflict and confrontation conversations. I think great cultures are full of teams that know how to participate in difficult conversations, because it's a two-sided experience. If you came to me and said, hey, Ro, can I have a tough stuff conversation? I know how to behave so we get the most out of the conversation. So I know that I might get defensive. I know that I might get angry. I know that I might go silent. But if I know that I'm going to do that and I can behave differently, we'll have a better conversation more quickly.
I love that. That's great feedback, Ro. And I remember very early on in my career as a school leader, I didn't want to address an issue because I thought it was easier not to. And in my ignorance, I just assumed that it would resolve itself. And of course it didn't. And my boss said, look, if you fail to address this issue, now you are the issue. And I thought, wow, that's quite confronting. But it is true. I think as leaders, we have to be those people that are willing to address the issue and not sweep it under the rug, because it really doesn't go away, does it? It just percolates.
Well, it's worse than that. It doesn't go away. And then ultimately the bad behavior gets embedded into the team's way of working. Then it gets protected. It's really dangerous. And so you've got to be able to have a way of having these conversations early. You've got to understand what your bias is. And then you've got to make sure everybody knows what it is that we're going to be doing. How do we have, so I would often ask somebody, I'd say, hey, how do you like to be encouraged? Because let's just say you're not a words of affirmation person from the love languages point of view. they don't really care whether you tell them or not. It doesn't mean that much to them, but they might go, well, hey, if you could write something to, my colleagues and CC the higher ups, that'd be great. Okay. I would then follow that up with, listen, if things aren't going the way we agreed that they would, how do you want me to have a feedback conversation? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, love that.
People will tell you. And you go, have you had any bad experiences with feedback conversations? Is there something we've got to be aware of and make sure that we avoid or rebuild our confidence together?
Yeah.
And people will tell you, look, I like it direct, or I like it written down, or tell me that it's going to happen and give me a day to think about it. It's those types of things. Again, when in doubt, ask.
And I love that notion, Ro, about like personalizing feedback.
Mm.
And I think another one of the mistakes I made in my early on as a school leader was I thought everyone required and needed the same type of feedback. So an email, and that's not the case. And so that's one of the questions when I start with a new team, I ask them, how would you like me to support you? Or what do you need? And also, how would you like feedback? You can have it written, we can have a chat, and I think just taking a bit of time to realize, okay, everyone actually responds to this differently. It's not all cookie cutter models, but that's so important, Ro. And I love that concept of just taking the time to actually ask. It's incredibly important. Yeah. So, Ro, what is the role then of a leader? Because it seems like it's a really complicated job. So how do you define leadership? And also, what do you think the role of a leader is within an organization?
Listen, I think the role of a leader, there isn't one thing. I think the first job is to mobilize people in the pursuit of a better future.
Love that.
I really believe that. I think that's a privilege. Then I actually think that the role of a leader is actually to help people get better and do better. That takes time and attention and care and interest and investment. And then actually one of the more recent thoughts is the role of a leader is actually to work hard at reducing friction. Again, when you've been doing the do for a while, people are really good at their jobs. And one of our roles as a leader is to reduce the things that would get in the way, reduce the friction. Now, I don't mean reduce the struggle. I don't necessarily mean reduce the fact that it could be hard, because good science tells us that teams that struggle together actually can achieve higher levels of bonding, trust, and cohesion. And that's an interesting counterintuitive thought. But there isn't just one job of a leader. The danger is the leader thinks they should be doing a whole lot of things that other people can and want to do. Right. And I've been guilty of that. I think, I'm much more likely to hand off 80% of things because other people can do them better, and they're not really a great use of my time and energy. But that last 20%, setting direction, navigating key relationships, identifying critical success factors, that's a really important part of being a leader. And that requires us to be as best as we can on top of our game. One of your questions is about, where we might be underinvesting. Leaders have got to take seriously the whole diet, sleep, and exercise side of things. In any executive coaching conversation, I'm always asking them about, their eating habits, their drinking habits, their sleeping habits, and because they serve and impact our ability to be switched on powerfully. And so there's a lot to it when it comes to leadership, but at a fundamental level, I think it's that sense of mobilizing people to a better future, helping people improve, and then reducing friction as best as they can.
Yeah, there's so much in that, Ro. And I think of my incredible principal who I've had the privilege of having on the podcast, and she does all of those. I think being a school principal is quite possibly the most challenging job on earth. She has, to your third point, she has this incredible ability to remove those friction points. I've never worked in a school where there are incredible systems and processes, and it's actually releasing to let people do their job, because as you said, people are really good at their job and very competent and very passionate. And so I love that you brought that up, Ro. I think that's incredibly important. Final question, Ro, if you don't mind, and I'm so grateful that you would give me a little bit of your time today. What advice would you give to someone who is about to step into a leadership role?
Well, we've talked about a mutual friend, Shelley Johnson, and at Boldside. I've known Shelley pre-Boldside, and I'm just so delighted for her success, and just a wonderful human. And I think she says it better than I know anybody else says it. She said that taking on a leadership role isn't an increase in responsibility, it's a career change.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, even in the education sector, when you go from being one among to leading people, you are changing the allocation of your energy, you're changing the allocation of your responsibilities, and you need to understand what that means and what that means in practice. It's an age-old tension that somebody may get promoted from within, and at the end of one year, they're a classroom teacher, and at the beginning of the next, they're overseeing their friends.
Totally.
That's right. And so it's really important. So what I would do is, the first thing I would do is I would clarify the expectations. What are the expectations? What do you expect from me? What do I expect from you? What do we do to make sure things are going well? What do we do when things are not going well? How can I support you? How can I challenge you? And what are we going to celebrate? They're the handful of questions that I would come across. And ask them enthusiastically and regularly. Be as curious as you possibly can. But also take some time to remember that as the leader, you've been entrusted with the responsibility to make those 5% decisions that are your responsibility. What are your responsibility? Leaders get the privilege of setting direction. Leaders get the privilege of setting the bar and maintaining that pace and that way of working. But remember that we trip each other up typically because of poor expectations, poor skills, and we don't really know what to do when we go off track. So just ask. And keep asking those questions. I would find as much external help as possible. And as we talked about earlier, there are platforms out there that will help you become a ridiculously great leader by listening to, TED Talks, YouTube, podcasts, Blinkist, books. It's really, really important. So that's where I would start anyway.
Yeah, Ro, it has been an absolute joy to get to speak to you today. And it's just so wonderful to get to see your leadership trajectory and to see how that has changed and developed and evolved over so many years. And I think one of the many things I'm so grateful for you is that you're still the same leader in the sense that you are all about people. You're all about helping people to become better. You're one of the best listeners that I know. And for someone who seems like they've got a lot going on, you're incredibly generous with your time. You're always someone that is happy to take a phone call and have a chat. So I can't thank you enough for your leadership and for your example over the last, 25 years. It's crazy to say that.
Yeah, I know, right?
And it's really wonderful to get to catch up with you today, Ro. And where can people find out more about the amazing work that you're involved in? And I'll put
our organization is Pragmatic Thinking. We are at pragmatichthinking.com. We're on LinkedIn as well. I'm Rohan at pragmatichthinking.com is my email, or Rohan Dredge on LinkedIn. They are the best places to find me from a business perspective. If you want to see my amateur attempts at photography, follow me on Facebook. I enjoy a bit of that as well. But I'm reasonably active in those platforms, and so that's where people can find us and move forward.
Fantastic. Rohan, it has been a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate it so much.